Hello and welcome to the In Publishing podcast. My name is James Evelegh and I'm the editor of In Publishing. My guest this time is Dave Musgrove, content director for the history portfolio at Immediate Media, and one of the driving forces behind the hugely successful HistoryExtra podcast, which is currently celebrating the twin milestones of 15 years and 150 million downloads. Dave tells us how the podcast has evolved.
For the first few years, it was very much a marketing channel reaching out, enabling us to develop other digital iterations. More recently, it's definitely a monetisable product, and we're now taking revenue directly via advertisements and very recently via a subscription product.
He also explains the thinking behind their decision to put a paywall on the HistoryExtra website.
You do have to reach a point where you think, well, our content has value. This is high quality premium content, and there is a risk in putting content out there and not demonstrating the fact that it is worth paying for. I mean, I think that is important. It's important to say that the stuff you've made, created, commissioned, edited has a value and is worth paying. Otherwise, you're devaluing it immediately.
And the importance of giving the audience what they want.
I think it's all about trying to give our users, our audience, the content that they want in the medium that they want. So we're well placed for that. So if you're a podcast listener, we're giving you podcasts. If you're a print magazine purchaser, we're giving you print magazines. If you're a fan of websites, then you can get the content on the websites. We're about hopefully to build out an app which will also complement the paywall operation,
amongst many other things. Before we hear more from Dave, a quick word about our valued sponsors. We would like to thank our podcast sponsor, Air Business, a market leader in distribution and subscription management services for the publishing industry. Its end-to-end service includes subscriber acquisition and marketing strategy, worldwide distribution, digital mail and e-commerce fulfillment, and warehouse and freight logistics. For more information, visit airbusiness.com. Dave Musgrove, welcome to the In Publishing podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, James.
Now, firstly, many congratulations on hitting two big milestones with your HistoryExtra podcast. 15 years and an amazing 150 million downloads. I mean, it's simply fantastic. How do you plan to celebrate?
Well, of course, by talking to you on this podcast, which is a great honour. Thank you so much for having me. But obviously, we're looking to commemorate these two quite notable milestones. So we've commissioned a new series, which is called 15 Minutes of Fame, to tie in with the 15 theme there. And we've asked 15 leading historians to nominate people from history who deserve to have a bit more credit. And we've asked the historians to tell their stories in 15 minutes. So we've got, for instance, Susanna Lipscomb, Mark Morris, Jerry Brosson, Tom Holland, Michael Wood, and Janina Ramirez amongst the historical luminaries nominating. And they're telling some really interesting stories. And I think it's going to be a really exciting series and an addition to our podcast offering.
Okay, brilliant. Without giving anything away, and what kind of people are they looking at? People who deserve a bit more credit. What kind of instance or people would that be?
So it's people who either have been ignored by history, have been missed out by historians, or perhaps just a couple of occasions where they've just got really interesting life stories. So a couple of examples. Tom Holland, who's a great communicator, has chosen a chap called Franz Noctja. Never quite sure how to pronounce his name, and Tom wasn't entirely sure either, but he's a very curious chap, a Hungarian-Albanian aristocrat from the turn of the 20th century who lived a fantastic life, was an adventurer and geologist and a paleobotanist, and surprisingly was the first man to hijack a plane, lived an amazing life, and then died quite a tragic end, which I won't reveal because it slightly spoils the story, but that's the sort of measure. And then Jerry Brosson, the lecturer from Queen Mary University of London, has chosen Mary Tharp, who was a groundbreaking cartographer from the middle of the 20th century. This woman had an amazing life, and she basically mapped the ocean floor and helped to establish the concept of continental drift. And she's been very much overlooked. She's not a famous figure, but she was really important in establishing what we understand of geographical process.
Fascinating. And you might have said these are going out, in the magazine or presumably in the podcast?
They're going out in the podcast, so we're going to launch them on the 27th of June, and we're going to run one a week in the podcast, and we're also going to have text-based versions of them going onto our website, and we'll have some sort of element in the magazine as well.
Now, if you look back to 2007, the development of the podcast, what was the thinking and the expectation when you launched HistoryExtra podcast back then?
So I remember it quite vividly. I was the editor of BBC History magazine at the time, and I was lined up to interview a chap called Professor Ian Kershaw, who's now Professor Sir Ian Kershaw. And he is one of the leading experts in the Third Reich, a great biographer of Hitler and an expert on Nazi Germany. So a really big name. And I thought, well, I was going to interview him and write a feature for the magazine. I thought, well, I've heard talk of this podcasting thing. If I'm going to speak to him anyway, why don't I see if he's okay with me recording it, and we'll try and make a podcast. And we did, and it sounded pretty good. I thought it was a really interesting conversation. We put it out, and some people listened, and we thought, well, this we're onto something here. So we committed to then attempt to do a monthly podcast from there. Got some really good names involved, and the thing spiraled over the years. And so what we were thinking to do at the time was just to make sure that we were maximizing what we were getting out of our content. And it just seemed like a really obvious idea that if you're speaking to somebody for a print feature, you might as well record the interview and see how it works. Obviously, we've developed and iterated quite a lot since then, but it was a pretty simple idea to speak to people who had something to say, interesting people, and to let them speak at length. At the time, there wasn't really many opportunities for historians to speak at length, for half an hour, 45 minutes, and explain their research, their thinking, their new ideas without being interrupted. Aside from hopefully some trenchant questions, that wasn't the case. Now, quite different. There's a lot of podcasts going on, as I'm sure you're aware. But back then, it was quite a new idea, and it seemed like a sensible way to approach things.
And what was your expectations in terms of numbers? I mean, obviously, it's grown enormously. What was your sense of how big it would grow when you first started?
I mean, that is a great question, because really we had no idea at all. We just thought, well, this is a worthwhile thing to do to give additional benefit to our readers. We talked about it in the magazine. We said, well, if you're buying the magazine, if you like this, then why not have this little extra benefit? So I kind of think we thought at the time that it would be simply listened to by our subscribers and newsstand purchasers. We didn't have much of a digital presence at the time, but actually, it proved to be a really strong hit. We got in at a really good time. Apple picked us up and supported us, and when we got good slots in their podcast player at the time, and people started talking about us and listening to us, and it gave us a platform to really build our digital presence over the next 15 years. And we can talk about that a bit more, I guess, if you'd like to go into that.
Absolutely. And I must ask, which over the 15 years has been the single episode which has been the most popular, had the most downloads, and why do you think that is?
Well, it's a slightly difficult question to answer, actually, because obviously we've been going for 15 years. We've done over 1,300 episodes, and there's a long tail of listens. So people, when they find us, they tend to listen back to episodes over the years. So some of the earlier episodes have sort of an abnormal number of listens, simply by dint of the fact that they've been around for a while. But if we look at the last couple of years, the podcasts that have been in the top 10 are episodes mostly from a new sort of franchise that we launched at the start of the pandemic, which is the Everything You Want to Know series. And the idea there is that it's user-generated content. We basically pick a big topic, let's say the Black Death, and we find a leading expert who can answer questions on it. And then we put a call out on social media to our audience and say, what questions would you like answered on this topic? We check out what the big search terms are on Google Search Console and Ahrefs, and sort of check out what people are looking for, and then we pull together a list of questions that sort of explain that particular topic. We put them to the expert, and we have a really in-depth look at a big topic, and that seems to be very, very popular. So in the last couple of years, the top 10 is dominated by podcasts in that series.
And what kind of numbers are we looking at? Obviously, you've had 150 million downloads overall. A successful podcast, a successful episode, how many roughly downloads would you be looking for an individual episode?
It does vary quite a lot, but somewhere between 100 and 200,000 would be a sort of a decent sort of number.
Wow. And in terms of other popular things, are there, in your experience, periods of history, eras, particular historical characters that prove to be kind of dead cert winners as well?
We've got a big following amongst our listenership of people who are interested in medieval history. So so topics about medieval kings and queens seem to go down very well. The Tudors, you won't be surprised. I know you know a bit about history yourself, James. The Tudors are perennially popular topics, so that always goes down well. The wars, the First World War, Second World War, they continue to be interesting. But we do find that some sort of outliers do well as well for reasons that we can't quite explain. There was one on medieval Ethiopia, which went down very well, for instance, which perhaps was a slightly surprising choice. So sometimes things just get picked up by certain groups, I think, and people listen to them. But it's kind of the more obvious big historical topics seem to go down well.
And when it comes to creating a successful podcast, which you've obviously done, what are the top things to get right? Are there any tips you can give us for the rest of us, so to speak, and any common pitfalls to avoid?
Well, as we were setting up this podcast, you went to great lengths to try and ensure that we had the audio quality right. So, you talked me through a list of things to do and not to do, and that is crucial. You've got to do your best to get the best quality audio that you can. If people are lending you their ears to listen to the podcast, you need to do them the service of making sure that the quality is as strong as it can be. So invest in technology and kit and time spent with your interviewees if you've got an interview-based podcast, to ensure that they know what's required of them, and to as you said to me at the start of the podcast, turn off your phone, make sure the door's not going to slam, that sort of thing. It's absolutely crucial. It's basic, but it's crucial. Secondly, I think it's really good to commit to some sort of format. So you've got to find something that you can keep doing, so that the audience that you build up knows to expect a familiar sort of format. It's not really, I don't think it's very beneficial to do one great podcast on one topic and then sort of leave it at that. Say you've done podcasting and we're done. You need to be able to commit to doing something on a regular basis. It doesn't matter what level of regularity, but to be regular, and it could be a season, 10 episodes over a summer or something like that would be absolutely fine. But something that you can, so the audience knows that there's more. You've got to keep giving them more, and I think that's very important. And if you're coming at it from the angle of a publishing house, of a media company, maybe a print publishing company, you've got to sort of find a way to play to your strengths there, and that's what we've done with the HistoryExtra podcast. As I said at the top of the interview, we basically did an extension of what we were doing anyway, interviewing and talking to historians. We had access to historians, to leading figures in historical study. They were willing to talk to us because of the print magazine. So it was fairly easy for us to just have that extension. So keep it simple, find a format that you can do, and try and build off your existing platform. So if you're a reviews magazine or a reviews website, then maybe get your reviews editor to agree to do a regular review section, something that you can keep going with. I think that's crucial. The regularity of frequency and a sense that the audience can keep coming back and listening to something which has a similar vein to it.
And in terms of common pitfalls to avoid, I presume in one sense it's not doing any of those. But are there any other pitfalls which, in your experience, maybe you've even done some yourself, but from what publishers get wrong, before they get it right, obviously.
Yeah, I think don't. I mean, it's a build on what I've just said. Don't try and make things too clever. Once you've established where you're at, once you've got a presence, once you know what you're doing, then you can start thinking about doing more exciting things, more complicated things like multi-part narrative series, that sort of thing. But don't get ahead of yourself when you're starting. Do something which you can deliver. That's the key thing, because you might not be able to monetize this in the first instance. You've got to do something which you can rely on and can keep delivering. So manage your expectations. I suppose that would be the main thing.
Now, Dave, you mentioned earlier that when you started the podcast, it was very part of the motivation was to make sure you're exploring this new channel. Or I say new, fairly new channel, which a lot of publishers hadn't yet explored. But in terms of as it's developed and to the size it is now, what is the business case for the podcast, and where does it fit in with your overall publishing strategy?
So, as you know, I work for Immediate Media. That's our parent company of BBC History Magazine and HistoryExtra. And Immediate, one of the main planks of Immediate strategy is to build out new digital streams, new digital revenue streams that play to our existing strengths. So we've got some great brands doing some great things, and we're all about trying to branch out, diversify into new channels. So it fits in very clearly into that. From History Extra's perspective specifically, and from BBC History Magazine to start with, the expectation was that it would be a marketing channel in the first instance, that it would reach out, as I said to start with, that we would deliver added value to our existing readers and subscribers, but then we would also start to reach out and find new people. And that proved to be the case, and we were thus able to build out some very very strong, very early digital iterations of the print magazine. We were early into digital editions, and we were able to do that because we'd established a digital audience via the podcast. We had people who were aware of what we stood for, our brand, our name, and importantly, beyond just these shores, beyond Britain. So we quickly built up an American following, which has been very useful to us in building out the digital editions. And I know this because anecdotally, back in the day, back in 2010, 2011, there was a bunch of historians who were sent by their publishers to do book tours in the States, and they came back to me and said, we had a great book tour, we spoke to big crowds in all sorts of places, and what we kept hearing was that that people had first heard of me and my book via the History Extra podcast. So a light bulb moment there. Obviously that meant that we were reaching an audience that we weren't able to reach. So that was super helpful. So for the first few years, it was very much a marketing channel, reaching out, enabling us to develop other digital iterations. More recently, it's definitely a monetizable product, and we're now taking revenue directly via advertisements and very recently via a subscription product.
Okay, can you tell us a bit more about the subs product?
Yeah, so
in terms of the podcast, that is.
Yeah, of course. So back in June last year, June 21, we agreed with Apple, who we talk very regularly with, to go on to their brand new premium channel. So we've got a podcast, History Extra Plus, which sits on their premium subscriber channel, and listeners can get access to this for $1.99 a month. And what you get there is an ad-free version of the podcast. So it's so all the ads are spliced out. So if you're not somebody who wants to listen to ads, you can avoid them there. But we also provide exclusive early access to some of our series. So we've started doing multi-episode narrative series now. We started, the first one we did was a series about the Princes in the Tower, the famous Tudor mystery. I think that was an 8-part series. And then we've done ones on the Salem witch trials, history mysteries, various other multi-form series. And so what we're doing with those, we are putting those onto the premium podcast so that listeners get access to them in one block earlier than listeners to our feed with the ads on. And we've also curated some channels on there as well. So we've badged up podcasts on particular themes, on medieval history, on Viking history, on the Tudors, etc. So people who've got a particular interest area can find a guided listening choice there as well. So it's pretty interesting. And very, very early days with that, and I think it's still probably something which needs quite a lot more work to develop, but it's we're seeing some positive results. We're seeing quite a few people are prepared to invest hard cash in it, and that's that's gratifying. I guess quite a few people have probably been listening to us for quite a few years, and feel some obligation perhaps to hand over some money, but others I'm sure are just thinking this is good value and worth paying for. The series that we're doing, I should just mention these a bit more. So as I was saying, our sort of our initial concept was just to allow historians to speak, and that's good, and that is still our main conceit. But what we do. What we've started doing now, we've got the Everything You Want to Know podcast series, which I mentioned earlier, but we're also doing this other franchise, which is a narrative series, where we pick a topic and we interview a bunch of people and we create basically a radio style program. You need to invest a lot more time and resources into doing that, obviously, but the end result feels like it's a quite a different product, and so we feel that is a very strong element for this paid for feed. I should say also that we are then running those narrative episodes onto the main feed as well, but a couple of months delay. So you're still getting them if you're listening to the main feed, but you're getting the exclusive early access if you're listening to the subscription feed.
Oh, because I was about to ask whether, in a way, having a subs channel is a complicating factor because you have to decide which goes into which channel. But it sounds like everything goes into both, but there's a timing element. Is that right?
That's right. So we did have a little bit of that when we started this, and we thought, well, we're going to have to produce stuff specifically and exclusively for this channel. But then we thought, do you know what? Actually, we don't need to do that because the benefit here is the early access, the exclusivity, and the ad free. So that's what we're trading on now, and we're just sort of maximizing use of our time by then putting it out onto the main feed after the fact.
It just sounds like an enormous operation, your podcast. I mean, what kind of resources in terms of headcount are devoted to your podcasting?
So the good thing about the History Extra podcast is it's not one person. It's a range of voices, and that applies to interviewees and interviewers. So in comparison to some other podcasts out there, which are very much dominated by one person or one sort of narrative story, we're allowing lots of voices to speak and be part of the operation. So we've got a team of producers, of technical staff who are helping to sort out the audio, make sure we've got the right quality, and do the edits, the actual technical edits. So we've got 3 or 4 people doing that. We've got 2 designated podcast editors within the History Extra team, so 2 people whose sole remit is to work on the podcast. But importantly and crucially, and this has always been the case, the entire BBC History magazine and also its sister magazine, BBC History Revealed, and our website team on History Extra, all those people are involved in the interviewing process. So we've got a roster of maybe 10 people who are doing the interview. So our podcast editorial meetings are good fun because we have a bunch of people and everyone comes with ideas and suggestions of people to interview, and it's a bit of a bun fight for who does what, but we've got a lot of people who are willing to pitch in, and that's been kind of the nub of the success of the operation, to be honest. I mean, obviously putting out a lot of episodes a week is hard work. You need people to be invested in and think it's a worthwhile thing to be doing. Because we've been doing it for a while and we've seen growth, we've seen that it's good. Our editorial team are really happy to engage with it, and I think find it to be a very enjoyable part of their work and perhaps a diversion from what they would normally be doing if they're a sub or a writer on one of the print magazines.
Now, when you celebrated your 100 million downloads, which in fact was only a year ago, so I mean, it sounds like exponential growth going on here. You said at the time that you had big plans for, quote, more series, new ideas and new formats. I'd be particularly interested to hear about your thoughts on new ideas and formats.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I said, the Everything You Want to Know strand has been so popular that we're definitely going to continue with that and try and build that out, and perhaps think about other ways that we can involve people in sort of the user generated side of things. I've got ideas about a club that might sit around that, of people who are sort of really invested in that, and I think that's one thing that's interesting. I think these multi-episode narrative series are going to be a big plank of what we do going forward. So we've got plans for quite a few of those going ahead, and I think they will sort of bookmark what we're doing and will be a real point of listenership for people. They will come to us and they say, oh, okay, it's those guys who did the Salem Witch Trial series. So I think that's important. I'm also very excited about the 15 minutes concept that I talked about at the top of the interview. I think that's going to present a lot of opportunities to do slightly shorter form episodes. I should have said, I mean, our episodes vary from maybe half an hour to an hour. These Everything You Want to Know series, they tend to go for a little bit longer. But we rarely go too much shorter than that. But with this shorter format, it's I sort of have hope and aspiration that we might attract a slightly different audience, people who want a quicker listen. And I think there's things that we can do with that sort of format, and perhaps build out into a quick biographies strand, for instance. That would be fun. I've got ideas about something to do with travel, history and travel. I think there's something there, but that's slightly unformed at the moment. But I think there's something that we can do in that space as well.
Sounds fascinating. And if you look at other podcasters, outside of the history space, I mean, what general trends are you seeing in the way people put together podcasts and market them? And I suppose from the listener's point of view, how people are accessing them.
I mean, I'm pretty interested in what's going on with video at the moment. That seems to be a bit of a growth area of people creating podcasts that are also vodcasts, for want of a better word. You would have thought that there wouldn't be that much interest in watching someone sat in a recording studio having a chat with someone else, but that seems to be a thing that people are engaging with. So I think there's some potential there. That's maybe an area in which podcasting will move forward with. So we will be keeping an eye on that. I think there's celebrity podcasts are clearly a big thing. I wonder if people are going to maybe get a little tired of constantly listening to the same people talking about the same sort of interview. So perhaps there will be space for some new formats to come through. I mean, I really enjoy a BBC Sounds podcast, the Danny Robbins podcast about ghost stories, which seems to be quite an interesting little take. I think there's a lot of space for sort of mysteries at podcasts. That seems to be very much an area where people are happy to invest their time listening to things. So I think there's a few things there, but I do wonder about what's happening with video.
I mean, of course, video opens up I'd say new opportunities, but a whole load of production variables which you'd need to get your head around as well, I suppose.
Yeah, wow, it's a bit of a head scratch there to work out how you do that. Obviously, if you're editing for audio, that's one thing, and it's reasonably easy to sort of to make edits, clip things out. But if you then throw in video as well, it's a whole different paradigm of difficulty to make edits without making for a really clunky sort of watch. So then you need to start thinking about dropping in slideshows and things like that to cover edits. So then it becomes quite a different operation. I think you can. I'm not sure whether this is true nowadays. I think certainly a little while ago you could get away with a podcast that had a kind of a bit of a bucolic vibe to it, as if you slightly under edited perhaps. I don't think you can get away with that on video so easily, so I think you do need to make sure that you're working out what you do. But I mean it doesn't need to be a straight video of two people talking if that's your format. Obviously you can overlay images and just have a waveform going underneath it and that sort of thing. So there's lots of ways to think about it and try and work it out. But I think there's definitely interest in that. I was just thinking, if you've gone to the effort of conducting an interview, creating a podcast, it's maybe not a huge step to think about what you can do in terms of video.
Now, before we talk about your new paywall on HistoryExtra.com, Dave, I must ask you about the book you published last year, The Story of the Bayeux Tapestry, Unravelling the Norman Conquest. Firstly, why do you find the tapestry so fascinating? And secondly, are there any myths and misconceptions about the tapestry that you can put right for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I should name check my co-author, a chap called Professor Michael Lewis, who I wrote it with. He's a great expert on the tapestry. Reason I wrote it was because I don't know if you remember, a few years ago there was President Macron and Theresa May agreed that the Bayeux Tapestry would be loaned to Britain from Bayeux in Normandy at some point in the near future, and that was going to create quite a big moment. If that loan does ever come off, then it'll be probably one of the biggest historical displays in a museum that's ever happened. Why am I fascinated by it? Well, The other day on Twitter, I saw a meme of somebody who'd created something in the style of the Bayeux Tapestry, which was telling the story of what's happened in Ukraine in the last few months. And I think that's the reason why. It's because basically the tapestry, it was made 1,000 years ago, just after 1066, the Battle of Hastings. So it's a millennium old, very venerable, but yet it still is being used today as a mechanism to tell stories, to engage in political discourse. And you can tell me, but I can't think of a single other piece of art, medieval or otherwise, that has the longevity and longue durée of the Bayeux Tapestry. Somehow it just continues to speak to us. Any misconception? I mean, there's quite a few. The biggest one, and I'm sure you're aware of it, is the fact that it doesn't necessarily show King Harold being shot in the eye in the end of the Battle of Hastings, though the current tapestry shows a figure who does indeed have an arrow pointing into his eye. That's probably been stitched in a later restoration in the 18th or 19th centuries, and the original most likely didn't show an arrow going into his eye. That doesn't necessarily mean that Harold didn't die from an arrow wound, but the tapestry didn't show that in its original iteration.
Now, I believe you've recently introduced a digital paywall on HistoryExtra.com. A lot of publishers, as you know, Dave, are wrestling with paywall strategies. Can you tell us a bit about the thought processes that went into your decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, we've been building up our digital our identity, our digital brand over the past few years. Established a place there where we're pretty well recognised. And we thought we'd got to the time where we were ready to start trying to monetize that content. And we have a lot of material on our website. We spend a lot of time in developing it, curating it. We're paying for web editorial people to work on that site and to get it into a shape which looked good. As I said, it fits into Immediate's overall strategy of looking to diversify content streams and to make the absolute best of the content sources that we are producing. And also, I think we've come to a point now where there is a recognition and acceptance that subscription paying for services for digital assets is something that people are familiar with and happy to do, and so it felt like it was the right time to dip our toes in and see if we could reach an audience. And you do have to reach a point where you think, well, our content has value. This is high quality premium content, and there is a risk in putting content out there and not demonstrating the fact that it is worth paying for. I mean, I think that is important. It's important to say that the stuff you've made, created, commissioned, edited has a value and is worth paying. Otherwise, you're devaluing it immediately. So it felt like the right space to do it and the right time to do it.
And is the paywall a hard paywall, soft paywall, hybrid? All this terminology comes around, but is it site wide, or can people still read some free stuff as well?
There are. I'd say it's pretty hard at the moment, though we are testing and iterating and constantly sort of changing and making sure that we're doing the right thing. There are some areas where we're definitely closing it off. So on the premium podcast I'm talking about, we've got them on the site as well, and it wouldn't really make sense to have them free access elsewhere. We've also got quite a few video resources and assets on the site, which again are sort of just perpetually closed off. There's some other areas where we allow certain levels of access, and we allow certain sorts of access depending on where you've come from in your web journey. So we're trying to understand the sort of the user journey to the site. But I think as I said, it's very much an iterative process, and I think anyone who's involved with paywalls knows that you've got to keep testing and trying and seeing what works. And that is the beauty of this sort of thing, is you can very quickly get results and data and understand what people want and don't want and what works and doesn't work.
And is the end? I take your point about you having to, in a way, see how it goes. But can you see an end goal where it is a complete hard paywall across the site, and literally, if you want to look at any History Extra content whatsoever, you've got to pay?
I wouldn't make that prediction, because I think actually when you look at quite a few of the other sites that are involved with paywalls, they kind of there's times when they appear to have had hard paywalls. I'm not sorry. There are times when those websites seem to have had hard paywalls, and other times when they seem to have softer paywalls. And I think anyone who's involved with it is, as I said, is constantly testing and trying things. So it may be that at some point in the next few months or year or so, we go for like a super hard paywall. But equally, we may then pivot to look at different ways. And it's gonna very much depend on audience reaction, changing patterns. I mean, the web audience is not a homogenous bunch. It's, there people are doing different things at different times, and things may well change very rapidly. So we will just keep an eye on it and see what's working and most appropriate at any given time. You've got to be nimble with this sort of thing.
And when did the paywall go up? How long has it been in operation for?
So it's been a year or so, and it's going pretty well. People are interested in it. They are. We're seeing the numbers that we wanted to see. We're on track for our budget, and I think there's definitely a space for paywalls nowadays that perhaps maybe didn't exist quite so readily a few years back.
Now, you might have touched on it already, but what have been the key learnings so far? So it's been up about a year. As you say, you've got to be nimble. You've got to try things out. What have you learned so far?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we've learned is just how sort of complicated it is to get something like this off the ground. You might think it's pretty easy. You just slap a paywall functionality on a site and walk away and hope that people pay. Obviously, you could do that, but that would be that probably wouldn't work very well. The thing about immediate media is we're sort of, as I said in an earlier answer, we're very much set to be looking to develop these sorts of channels to diversify what we're doing. So we've got a whole new company structure which has been implemented in the last year and a half, with a central bunch of central teams working to support and add expertise to the brand team. So History as a brand team, we've got a bunch of central teams who are doing all sorts of pieces of work that help us to get where we're going. So to develop the paywall, it's been a mighty cross-functional enterprise over 12-18 months of people getting in rooms, or getting in virtual rooms, given where we are, and thrashing things out, trying to understand what is the most important thing. How do we get things working? Getting going with a test and learn MPV approach, MVP approach, and seeing what works, because it's new stuff, and you've got to be able to move and act quickly to get something like this working.
But early findings after the year, it's something you're going to pursue, the paywall strategy. You feel that this is the right path?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I wonder whether there's, as I was talking about earlier, whether there's a sort of a more clubbable element to it that we need to develop to try and make sure that we are allowing people to talk to us rather than being talked at. I don't think we are talking at, but to allow a bit more user interaction and a space for people to get involved in what we're doing. One of the things that I'm very pleased with that we've developed over during the paywall is creating a suite of newsletters which are sort of genre specific. So a medieval newsletter, a Tudor newsletter, a Victorian newsletter, and these going out fortnightly and appealing to people who have self-selected as saying, I am interested in Tudor history, I am interested in medieval history. And those newsletters are written by named members of editorial staff, and they have their pictures on the newsletter, and they are saying stuff about that particular topic and highlighting content that we've got on the site, podcasts that we've got coming out, giving users a sense of how we're working, what we're doing, what we're exciting about what we're doing, and sort of allowing them a little insight into our process. And I think we could build that out a bit more, and I think that would be quite an interesting way to develop a subscription to have a bit more of a clubby element to it.
Community is the buzzword at the moment. Is that the line you're thinking of when you talk about club?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, allowing people to get involved a bit more into the editorial process, to offer suggestions, and to know what we're working on. I think that's quite important, to give a sense that they can be part of our approach.
Now, looking ahead, what would you say are your main objectives for your various history brands?
So, obviously we're looking to grow. We want to continue to reach out to our digital audiences, but also we want to engage them more. That's kind of the key thing. We want to get them really invested in what we're doing and move them around our various properties as best we can, and as appropriate to them. I think it's all about trying to give our users, our audience, the content that they want in the medium that they want. So we're well placed for that. So if you're a podcast listener, we're giving you podcasts. If you're a print magazine purchaser, we're giving you print magazines. If you're a fan of websites, then you can get the content on the websites. We're about hopefully to build out an app which will also complement the paywall operation. So to make it to give the users what they want in the place that they want, that seems really important to me. And not to force it. If they don't want to listen to podcasts, that's cool. But to give them the option and to try and encourage them to say, that actually you might like this. This is some extra stuff. This is stuff that might interest you. So I think that's really important to get engagement into the site, into our operation, and to get people very much invested in it, because that's the way that we're going to build that community sense that I think you talked about earlier.
Yeah, you mentioned a new app. Is there anything more you can tell us about that, or is that still very much in the planning stages?
It's in the planning stages, but fairly close to fruition, I think, and that will be essentially an iteration of the website, but with some extra features, and which will allow our users to access the content sort of in the palm of their hand, if that's what they choose, and we will I think sort of link it very, very closely to what we're doing with the paywall.
So obviously, I was about to say a paid offering rather than the free offering.
Yeah, but very much linked to the digital subscription within the website.
Now, stepping back from outside of history for a moment, and if you look at the wider consumer magazine sector, I mean, obviously there are overlaps. How do you see the wider sector evolving over the next few years?
The print magazine sector.
Well, generally, no, not just print. Magazine with a small m, I suppose. Digital and print. The companies like Immediate, Future, and Bauer. Where do you see the sector as a whole going over the next few years?
Well, there is a lot of diversifying of channels and revenue streams in there. I mean, Future are obviously doing all sorts of things in that respect. I think that will definitely be a thing that people are looking to do, to find new ways to reach out to audiences and to position their content to audiences in new and innovative ways. I do wonder about print specifically. So I've been in the business for 20 years or so now, and I'm pretty sure that people were predicting the death of print when I started. It's obviously still very much alive. Prickly conditions with the pandemic, clearly, particularly for newsstand, though it did, I'm sure, for certainly for Immediate, and I'm sure for many other publishers, provide an opportunity to garner new subscribers when people weren't able to go to the shops. But I do wonder whether there's going to be something interesting and surprising that happens in the newsstand in the next few years. Obviously the high street is changing rapidly. What is going to happen there? I don't think it necessarily follows that there just won't be anyone going there and no shops will sell magazines. I don't know if anyone's saying that on the podcast. I'm sure they're not. But maybe something surprising will occur that means that actually there's a whole new lease of life given to newsstand sales. I don't know what it is, but I do wonder whether there's going to be some things that happen. It's not often you live through a pandemic, is it? What's going to come out of that? Is hard to know. I just think about a podcast we did a while back on the Black Death, actually going back to that, and the fact that after that pandemic, women in the Middle Ages found themselves in a position where they had a whole new opportunity to develop themselves and to take positions that weren't available to them before because of the wildly changed social circumstances. I wonder what's going to happen as we move out of this pandemic.
Do you have any hunches?
I think there's going to be a space for different sort of retail outlets. I wonder about sort of more niche retail outlets, people doing things that are a bit more specific, a bit more local, a bit more bespoke, and that gives an opportunity for people to decide what they want to sell. And obviously it'll be a lot harder for the likes of Frontline and Co to manage that sort of process. But maybe there'll be a whole different tranche of retail outlets.
Fascinating. Well, intriguing. Well, let's see. And finally, Dave, outside of work, a question we ask all our guests on the podcast: how do you relax?
Well, I've got 3 teenage girls, so that's not very relaxing. So I go running. I go running a long way and clear my head from the day's work.
A one-way run by the sound of things.
Sometimes.
Okay. How far do you run? Are you a marathon runner or round the block a couple of times? How far do you go?
Well, the furthest I've run is 102 miles, and that was quite tiring. My feet weren't in a good shape afterwards. The Cotswold Way. It's a fun thing to do. But
yeah. Do tell. I must ask, how long did that take? You didn't do it in one go, presumably, did you?
I did. I did it in 24 hours. Yeah. It was quite a thing. Yeah, it's a race. It's a thing. I didn't just do it. Yeah, but yeah, that's quite hard work.
Well, I'm super impressed and in awe. Dave Musgrove, thank you very much for being our guest on the In Publishing podcast.
Thank you, James.
A final word from our valued podcast sponsor. Air Business is trusted by 4,000 publications and 3 million happy subscribers, with 10 million customer records on file. It processes £500 million each year in 22 currencies and delivers over 300 million items. Find out more at airbusiness.com. Many thanks to Dave for being our guest this time. How the History Extra podcast began life off the back of a single interview and developed into a sustainable, successful, and highly productive operation is an inspirational story. The History Extra podcast can be found on all the usual platforms, and the History Extra website can be found at historyextra.com, but have your credit card ready. As for the Bayeux Tapestry, it's still in Normandy and well worth a visit. For more information about us and to listen to previous podcasts, go to our website, inpublishing.co.uk. Thank you for listening. We'll be back in a few weeks' time for another podcast. Bye for now.